Vanant Yast. This Yast ought to follow immediately after the Tir Yast, as it is derived from the same Sirozah formula, the one in which Testuria is invoked along with Vanant and Hapto Iringa. Some consider it to be a mere supplement to that Yast. Now, whether they're composed scriptures like Paul or somebody representing what a book of Moses would be or that sort of thing are not mere supplemental materials, not really the appropriate way to refer to that, but we can invoke by, in terms of authority. I'm personally not going to worship these things as intercessors. 0. May Ahura Mazda be rejoiced, and so on. Acham Bohu, holiness is the best of all good, and so on. I confess myself a worshipper of Mazda, a follower of Zarathustra, one who hates the Da'avas and obeys the laws of Ahura, for sacrifice, prayer, propitiation, and glorification unto Havana, the holy and master of holiness, and so on. Under the star Vanant, made by Mazda, be propitiation with sacrifice, prayer, propitiation, and glorification. Yata ahu va'eryo, the will of the Lord is the law of holiness, and so on. 1. We sacrifice unto the star Vanant, made by Mazda, the holy and master of holiness. I will sacrifice unto Vanant, strong, invoked by his own name, healing, in order to withstand the accursed and most foul Kraftstras of the most abominable Angra Ma'inu. 2. Yata'ahu va'eryo, the will of the Lord is the law of holiness. I bless the sacrifice of prayer and the strength and vigor of the star Vanant, made by Mazda. Asham Bohu, holiness is the best of all good, and so on. Give unto that man brightness and glory, and so on. Give him the bright, all-happy, blissful abode of the holy ones. Now, by so on, some of these formulas continue as we see from things identified by their opening phrase. But some of these things are things that you can add things unto, much like when a Muslim starts pointing in their prayer. Amongst that can be various supplications that aren't obliged part of that. The Kraftstras of Angra Ma'inu, so the undesirable creatures of Angra Ma'inu. But it could be the consciousness attached to that, the demiurgic connection. Not that there's actually a creation, a counter creation in physical terms, but in associative terms. And a lot of this, like we see we don't have to go to the Yazidi length of the astrology stuff. Of what typically people mean with astrology. When things happen this time of year, when this star halically rises or is in mid-sky at this time of night or that sort of thing. But we move on here and comment. We continue the comment on the Asha Yast. Parethu Vira, the fullness of intellect, mentioned in verse 1. All the Saoshants, Christians and their Messiah idea, like to narrow it down far more than it is, but But then again, there's the allies of such, who are to be active in the restoration of the world to eternal life. Frasho karete. Asha gives them the intelligence of life. Frasha kratu, through which they will be enabled to perform the task. We get the means, but are we doing what we can with our means? A lot of people worry about, And so the matra is the holy word. And Aeshma is the demon of anger. And Asha Unguhe herself, rumbling the tumble there, are supposed to obtain the drinking of the ha'ama, because it's a religious act. Now, if you need to take your medicine, you need to take your medicine, and praying with that is whatever, but the ritual drug use thing kind of, in part, seems to conflict with the message of Zarathustra. I know it's fully embedded in the text, but aga ere ma'itis. Asha Unguhe puts her aga ere ma'itis feet for long friendship. It's a weird phrase, and in verse 10, adorning themselves anku pas mana'u. And in verse 11, have daughters that sit agammo pa edessa. And they're not sure about the taking to battle part in the next verse. And of course, the noble steed stuff. So born of the entities. So Asha was born of her position, just like the other light beings in other mythologies, is that they're like God's computers or something like that. They don't have the choice whether to obey or disobey. They don't, they're set in their position. They don't have to prove themselves and that sort of stuff like the fire beings and the clay beings do. And of course, dot of us, as we're going over, they have, they're beings that have chosen to be such. And, that's interesting. There's the abortion entity. So, there's long been known to be herbs and stuff that help towards that. Some of these herbs have disappeared. Some of these are just fertility drugs. They're not really abortion drugs, but I, for example, grow an abortion drug. That's not its only use, but you don't give it to women who are of childbearing age anyways. But the producing of untimely issues. 54. Well, that kind of that kind of doesn't, that sounds, it softens it up a bit, if it's the following clauses in verse 54 well, after verse 54, about the Naotaras and the Turanians, allude to some myth of Asha Benguhe connected with the conflict between the Turanians and the Naotaras. Either Tusa and Vistauru, or more likely Vistaspa himself, to whom the preceding chapter and the last but one clause of the Yasts refer. She tried to flee in the way practiced by Ulysses in the Cyclops' cavern. Both parties were pursuing the animal that bore her, though they knew not what it bore, till children discovered her. And on to the Astad Yast. So in verse 1, we're referring to how the flocks, the food, and the wealth are given to the one possessed of it. And the da'ava are disease. So that while there's spiritual and physical diseases, and often they go in hand, the a'eka of verse 2 is what we're referring to. And since there's psychosomatic disease, sometimes it's hard to tell in a mythological reference what's what. But there's certainly amoral disease, isn't there? Who gives alms to the poor Mazdayasnians? It's not called Zoroastrianism, it's called, God is the one who the celebrations are for. The hymns, the worship in the more specific way. Even 1 foot, when she stays not there for long friendship, is, inside the family. Okay. Verse 4 there. And the rain falling in due time. The inside the royal palace is, in the royal palace to give charity. So the idea here is, of course, along the lines of how the welfare of the kingdom is the responsibility of the rulers. It's not just they get their, the rightly spoken words in verse 8, Arshukta Vako, the words conformable to the rights. Ha'am Akinem is that delights in Ha'ama later in that verse. And that man who sacrificed the Aryan glory. Well, the 5 tribes, the Hindus and the Persians, people would say, are the Indo-Iranian, would be the more accurate term. Of course, Iraqis don't like being called, a lot of Iraqis per se don't like being called Persian, but they're in that area being referred to, although they originally were more centered around Afghanistan and stuff. But Hara Berazaete is the ladder Alabors. And we have moved on to the Zamyad Yast. And the Hara Ete Barez is mentioned in verse 1 there. And the Caspian Sea is the land washed by waters, towards the east, mentioned there. Pa ren tarim aredo, and possibly beyond, is mentioned by the second mountain, Mount Zeredo, outside. So if that's towards the east, doesn't that mean Azerbaijan? Yep, this myth's coming out of Azerbaijan. Paran Tarem Aredo, possibly beyond. Okay. According to the Bundahis, Manusha is another name of Mount Zeredo. It is a mountain on which Manuskihar was born. The mountain that gives understanding, that preserves understanding, the later Mount Osdastar. So, Ushi Zau Ushi Darena. Okay. In verse 2. Mount Arzur is a summit at the gate of hell. The Arzur boom of the Bundahis, which is in the direction of Arum. Mountain Bumya. And before that, we're talking about Erizura. And Mount Ra'o Iveta is the Ro Yisin Omand mountain of the Bundahis. Its name means the mountain on which vegetation has grown. The Mount Va'ete Gaesa, the Bad Ges mountain near Herat, and Mount Iskata Upaere Sa'ena, or Mount Iskata rugged, belonging to the Upaere Sa'ena ridge. The Upaere Sa'ena ridge, or Apar Sen ridge, is the mountain of Persia, and its beginning is in Seistan and ends in Susiana. One of the things that we should probably think about here is that, you know, that reference, the mountains of Ararat in the Bible. It's like not any of the high hills count too. So we're having the same sort of non-specific sort of way. It's like, well, it's one of these mountains, or it's these mountains. Different sort of myth, but Caso de Fedra is possibly the name of the mountain. Mount Caso de Fedra Vafra. And that would be with the snows. So in the blank in 3. Sikadav is a mountain on which, among those which are in Kangdes. And Mount Sikadava. So in verse 5 here. And Mount Asnavant. Oh, well, we've already talked about that. The Mount Siak Omand, the Black Mountain, and Mount Vafar Omand, the Snowy Mountain of the Bundahis, which are said to have grown out of the Apar Sen ridge and extend towards China. An interesting thing that happens, Mount Usha Mount Siamaka in verse 5. Interesting thing about some of these myths is they contain things that about the geology and stuff that you wouldn't expect to be there. That you think that maybe they couldn't figure that out. Now, knowing a really, really ancient rock that is rare, that people couldn't have encountered its new appearance or something like that, to know that it was volcanic or sedimentary or whatever. But they knew from other rocks, so that sort of stuff you can, kind of figure out, you could say. The Spendiad mountain near Mount Ravand is the same as Mount Spento Data, Mount Mount Kadrava Aspa is the Kondrasp mountain by the town of Tus in Khorasan. And it's interesting, not even Alexander the Great conquered Khorasan. The Mongols didn't conquer Khorasan. They conquered parts of it. They conquered a path through it. But so as I'm recording this, there's a group that is pretty much is the first group in thousands of years to have done such things. The Ko-Iras mountain in Iran Veg is Mount Ka-O-Eresa. And the other mountains have grown out of Alborz. Well, the talk about the original mountains. The 244 in verse 7. One of the things that we need to, not need to, I guess, remember about that sort of thing is that certain, the symbolism of certain rocks, of certain ridges, and mountains and all that sort of stuff are connected to certain things. I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm trying to connect the two things. The verses and the comments themselves, because comments are going to make a lot more sense with the thing. The clave unto Ha'u Shanga, the Paradata, for a long time, for 40 years according to the Bundahis, for 30 years according to Firdausi. Now, you don't disrupt a person's worship or that sort of thing. You don't block the road or, that sort of thing. But But in the Islamic vision, there's the idea that if you're going to walk in front of somebody if you're going to walk through their prayer space, obviously, and they're in the middle of their ritual prayer, it would have been better if you waited for 40. So the 40 years thing is an important thing. For 616 years and 6 months, the Good Shepherd cleaving to Yima for a long time. Well, that's a long time to be a king. Verse 31 there. And food and drink. Both ailments. Okay, I wouldn't have thought that when you refer to both ailments being unfailing, the food and drink. There's a lot of people who pretend to be a god, but that's how he was of us. So, the words of falsehood and such came to him, and then it fleed like a bird, kind of like the soul exorcism thing that the Dogma of Angra Mainyu talks about. So that's like the goal, really, is to chase away the spirit being that's on your side, of Ahura Mazda's side. And the great, in verse 34, Yima Sha'eta, Fra Esta, and then, of course, Ozzy Dahaka was his foe that he had to compete against. Ozzy Dahaka is like the big antichrist figure, you could say, of all this. The glory is described as departing 3 times, because it is threefold, according as it belongs to the king considered as a priest, warrior, or husbandman. In that threefold character, it is identical with Adar Fraba, Adar Gushasp, and Adar Burzin Meher. A raven is listed as one of the incarnations of the genius of victory. And 16 here. So, fell back, Karasaspa fell back affrighted in verse 40. Refer to Yasna 9:2. This tale belongs to the widespread cyclists of the island whale, a whale whose back is mistaken by sailors for an island. They land upon it, cook their food there, and the monster, awakened by the heat, flies off and carries them away. And the 71st night in the Arabian Nights story is supposed to bring that about. I don't know. Sinks into the sea and either knocks them over or, is really what's being exaggerated. And so the 9, all the 9 that are killed. Oh, who killed the brood of Pathana? All the 9, and the brood of Nivika, and the brood of Dastayana. Known in the Menokired as the wolf Kapod, perhaps the blue wolf, which they also call Pehan. The 9 sons of Patha were 9 highwaymen. The very word Pathana seems to have had that meaning. Their defeat is told by Karasaspa in Apahlavi Rabayat as follows: I've slain the highwaymen who were so big in body that when they were walking, people considered in this way, that below them are the stars and moon, and below them moves the sun at dawn, and the water of the sea reaches up to their knees, and I reached up to their legs, and they were smitten on the legs by me. They fell, and the hills on the earth were shattered by them. Karasaspa's Pravasha accordingly is invoked against thieves. Perhaps the assimilation of the wolf Kapod in Pehan is merely a guess of the author of the Menokired. And the Golden Crown, Hitaspa, the murderer of Karasaspa's brother, Urvakshaya. And so, again, we see the mythologization of the details that people generally believed that weren't, mentioned in the prophetic message, kind of got put into the tradition in most cultures. So that's one of the things that we see here. The son of Dana, in verse 41 again, Danayana Vavresha is the Pahlavi name of a bird of prey, which might induce us to identify Varashava with the gigantic bird, Kamak, which overshadowed the earth and kept off the rain till the rivers dried up, and whose destruction was one of the feats of Karasaspa. Like the Pa Erika Gnathaete, who clave to Karasaspa, sort of a female entity sort of thing. The many Pa Erikas. Pita'ana. Much like in these grimoires, forget the Christianization and that sort of thing. Some of it contains about other myths rather than just inventing their own myth. Where such and such entity had such and such legions and that sort of thing. And so the idea came with all of them that, well, how many legions did this one have and how many, the well-beloved who killed Arizo Shamana. We don't need to read all verse 42 there, but there's doubt fra Zustem, and there's some obscureness in this. And there's a note here. Okay, the manly-hearted Kursaspa killed him, his life went away, his spirit vanished. 44. Sna Vidaka reminds one of the Titanic Otis and Ephialtes. Such were they youths, had they to manhood grown. Almighty Jove had trembled on his throne, but ere the harvest of the beard began to bristle on the chin, and promised man his shafts Apollo aimed. And the Pope, page 221. And the glory that cannot be seized, in verse 45, is the priestly glory. Now, one of the things where people were all off, bent out of shape or whatnot about Zarathustra was the reason why they were called magicians is, okay, some from the Magi thing, other from the fact that, they were a community that everybody was a priest or priestess. And so when it departed for the Akem Mano, the bad thought, the demonic counterpart of Bahu Mano. Spit Ura was the brother of Yimas. Spitur was he who, with Dahak, cut up Yim. Nothing more is known of him, though he appears to have played a great part in the original Yima legend, and to have stood up to his brother in the same relation as Barma Yun and Kata Yun Duferi Dun. Shagad to Rustam. Ferdowsi does not mention him and makes Dahak